Welcome back, happy engineers. And I'm here today with Daniel, my good buddy. We're in a mastermind together. It had such a pleasure getting to know you, even just in the last few days. Some amazing time together. Daniel, welcome to the Happy Engineer podcast, man.
It's an honor to be with you and all the people who are listening.
I'll just speak briefly in acknowledgement of you because it's been such a pleasure to spend this time with you. Daniel, you're one of these leaders who, just even virtually being in the room with, has such a calm, confident, putting me at ease with your energy and your presence. And I just love it. I just appreciate so much that about you. And anyway, I want to say that, man. You're such a great guy to be
Yeah,
around, and what a pleasure to know you.
thank you. Thank you. I mean a lot.
So I want to begin with just setting the stage about all that you've accomplished in the academic side of your world. And there's a lot we're going to cover today, both in the hard sciences and also some of the energetic and mindful and spiritual side of life. But I wanted to just lay it out there for the engineering leader listening, all the amazing work that you've done. Would you first just tell us a little bit about those academic credentials and your degrees and the research that you've been a part of, just to help us understand the breadth of work you're really an expert in?
Yeah, absolutely. Just a brief bio. So when I was 17, I had this realization that people around me didn't know as much as I thought they did. And when I was 17, I was just in school and I had this awareness, so kind of disillusionment in a way. It's like, well, they're actually not as smart as I want them to be, and they don't have as much wisdom as I need them to have. And that really set me on my own journey. And I had to study philosophy, psychology, and really I had to figure it out on my own. That was sort of the beginning of my journey, which led me then to study psychology at the University of Salzburg. I'm originally from Austria and got my bachelor's and master's there and fell in love with a psychiatrist named David Hawkins in Sedona, and then moved to the United States because in school in Austria and University of Salzburg, I didn't quite fill my hunger for the truth and for what I needed to know to really feel like I'm growing up in a holistic way. So in part, my move to America was to learn from the best and from the greatest. And I got another master's degree here in Arizona, Prescott College. And then I was fortunate enough to meet Dr. William A. Tiller from Stanford University. He was a professor of engineering and material science. And in the later stage of his career, he got really interested in the interface between mind and living and non-living systems and how human intention can impact experiments in a way, because in science we often try to exclude the experimenter to make sure this is consistent across different settings and it's the same across different experimenters. So we kind of exclude the placebo effect, but he was really interested in, can we systemically actually use the human intention as a scientific variable that we can include into the thermodynamic variables, into the scientific framework of our time. So he was really kind of like an out of the box pioneer, and he was very esteemed and very smart. And I was fortunate enough to be his last doctoral student. And I worked with him on the impact of human intention on autistically influenced kids, like children diagnosed with autistic spectrum disorder and their mothers. So we were able to observe for 1 year how his technology that he developed was influencing children and their mothers, and it was a very positive influence. And we just published a paper actually last week, so it just came out
Wow.
now. Yeah. So it took a while for us to find a journal that was interested and confident enough to publish our research because it is out of the box. And Dr. Tiller, before he went to study these effects with humans, he had experiments that showed how he could influence the raising and the decreasing of pH by 1 unit systematically. So that was his first experiment, which is pretty cool. You pretty much raise and lower the pH of water. He shortened the time of the fruit fly maturation in vitro, in vivo, and he increased the liver enzyme and several other experiments. But these are just to name a few that the research he's done has been amazing, and he's been featured in that movie. What Bleep Do We Know? And I don't know if you've ever seen that, but that's a kind of a fun movie to watch, especially for people who are new to this. Yeah.
Yeah. So much we could unpack in that space. And just to make it clear, the output measures of pH or your liver enzyme, et cetera, that piece makes sense. But that input
The
of
input,
human intention,
yes.
how was that measured as an input. Can you just tell us really briefly, like, what were the things going into those experiments?
Dr. Tiller wanted to make intention a kind of like an independent variable in a way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Rather than just a confounding variable, like make it a systemic independent variable that we can sort of imprint. So what he did is like he imprinted a human intention to an electronic device. And the electronic device then was a host for that intention. It's called an intention host device. So it's almost like that the mind was entangled with a physical substrate, and that was kind of like a simple device looking like that, looking most like an iPod of some sort, right? So when that device with the intention was near water, the water would increase or decrease depending on what was imprinted on the device. That also worked when that device was sent to Australia, for example, and then in the lab in Australia, they were putting that device near the water and it did the same thing. And it was also reproduced by having that device here in Arizona. And then the intention was to broadcast that intention at distance, non-locally, to Berlin in a lab there, and the pH of water would raise or lower depending on the instruction there as well. So, and then, that opened the gates for further research. It's like, okay, if we can do this with water, there's also, can we do this on fruit flies? Can we do this on humans? So it's
yes,
very fascinating. And I'm in the process of researching now how this can be utilized to take off epigenetic age in humans, because we now have tests that can actually tell you how your epigenetic is vis-a-vis your chronological age. So if we can shave off some epigenetic age of humans, like a year or two, or maybe more, who knows? I mean, wouldn't that be an amazing thing? If you are decreasing aging by 1 year every year, you become immortal.
It opens what a moment right there. Do I chase that? Oh, wow. I wish we had time for us to all get PhDs in this conversation, because this is so fascinating, but I know we don't need to get too deep into the incredible work that you're doing right now, but I can't wait to understand how the research goes that you're about to embark on.
Thank you.
Daniel, could you really quick back up? You said something at the beginning of how you got into all this work and the research that you've done and the degrees that you've accumulated, that when you were young, there was a lack of wisdom and insight around you. And I'm just curious, was there any moment or any story that comes to mind that really highlighted that gap for you and ignited this hunger to go and pursue this knowledge and this wisdom?
Yeah, I must say, since I was very young, I was a spiritual child, and I was very in awe of the beauty of the world and my parents and my environment. And at some point in my life, I think around age 3, I got my wires crossed. And from then on, I felt like some things doesn't seem right anymore. It's almost like if you would say like I'm a machine, like some circuits weren't connecting anymore in the right way inside of me. I started doubting myself. I started feeling alone and separate. I had trust issues. I had insecure attachment. I was worried. That was with me for a very, very, very long time. And it was really the motivator for me to get into the human transformation field and to really ask, like, what is the nature of human suffering? Why do we hurt? Why do we feel lonely? And how can we remedy that? Like, how can we fix that, right? So that since early on, I had this urgency to heal. I had this call, like this burning longing in my soul to kind of find a remedy that works for me. And that led me from philosophy to psychology to kind of like mind-body physics to, it really was the motivator for me to move to America, because the formal education I have is great. The PhDs and the master's degrees and all the internships and all that. It's wonderful. But I came really predominantly to America to be surrounded with mentors. So where I could get the education that I didn't get from my teachers in school, from my parents, from my friends, and where I was from Austria, from the European sort of mindset. So I had always this longing to kind of go out and find something where I feel like these people get me and they can be like a ladder for me that I can use to elevate myself to where I wanted to be. So, and I moved to Arizona to study with Dr. David Hawkins, who used to be an amazing psychiatrist, but who also happened to be a mystic who in his later life just completely explored the internal dimensions of the human psyche and soul. That's what brought me over the pond from Europe to America, and that's where my informal education started in a way. I was a student of David Hawkins. I was a student of Dr. William Tiller. I had the best Jungian psychoanalyst as my analyst for 5 years, Dr. Nathan Swartz-Salant. And I was surrounded with other very amazing healers. And some of them, I'm currently coaching with Steve Hardison, who is one of the best or the best life coach on the planet.
Yes.
So I'm mentoring under him for several years now. So I'm been really blessed to be here in America. We're forever grateful to be surrounded with so many beautiful people,
It's
and then
amazing.
also get to know you in the process as well. Yeah.
I'm honored to even be considered in the same conversation as someone like Steve Hardison and the names you've mentioned. But Daniel, something that I am responding to in the moment as you're describing your journey, and I'm curious your take on this. Do you feel that the pursuit of the degrees and the knowledge, and ultimately the master's in counseling psychology, the master's in psychology, the doctorate in clinical psychology, do you think that those things were simply a part of your journey to ultimately land in the place and around the people who you needed to be around to discover what you discovered? Or is what you learned in those degrees really fundamental to the healing and the integration and the work that you've done? Like, were they just part of the path and you're seeking, but in the end it wasn't really necessary to get to where you wanted to go? Or do you think, no, absolutely, like that work was fundamental to my healing?
Yeah, I think what makes my journey kind of unique is that I was always looking for a holistic approach to life and for an overarching framework that can transcend everything, but also include everything. So for me, it was necessary to have the left brain education and also the right brain understanding, the exterior dimension of proof and replicability, but also the inner certainty and the empiricism that comes from living through certain developmental stages or difficulties in your own life that then become fabric of who you are. So the subjective and the objective, the science and the spirit, or the soul and the science. So for me, it was always important to have both, because I knew that in my path, I needed to find a synthesis, and I was a bridge builder in this life. This life was not for me to become a specialist in just psychology or a specialist in just science. For me, it was like, okay, in this life, you get to be somebody that can be connecting many disciplines and who can talk many different languages. And I'm not going to go down rabbit holes in this life because I don't have the time for it. But for me, it's important to have like an overall integration of all these things. You want to be good at it as a human being. You want to be good as a thinker, and to be good at all that it requires a lot of dedication and time and commitment to excellence.
I love that. So for me, coming from the engineering background, I really resonate with the left brain, high pursuit and high value in my life of education and knowledge. I love to learn. I always said if I could just get paid to go to school all the time, I probably would have done that. Nobody yet wants to do that for me, so it hasn't happened. But can you tell us about this other side? You've used words like soul. We've used the word energy a lot. We've talked about, it's psycho-spiritual or psycho-energetic activity. And can you just describe, when we say, the soul, or we use these kinds of words, what are we talking about?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Many people don't know that psychology was actually meant to be a science of the soul. Psychology is the science of the soul. And in ways, I'm kind of like pretty passionate about that topic, because I feel like, where is the science of the soul? What does it mean to have a science of the soul? Is a science of the soul even possible, right? And on that, we could do like a 3-hour podcast in itself. Right?
Sure.
Because okay, there's like in psychology, to define the soul is like the science of human behavior. Like psychology is the science of human behavior, right? It's just like, but the soul is so much more. The soul also includes the interior dimensions as well, right? So as it's like they say, they have this term qualia in philosophy, right? That denotes subjective experience of something. Like, what is the color red, or what does water taste like? The subjective qualities that you cannot actually measure. Like, give me a cup of love, right? Can you give me a cup of love, right? I mean, there's things that we have inside that we know to be true empirically on the inside, but they're very hard to measure on the outside. For me, there has never been a really strict separation between the inner and outer, because I always knew that there was a really close relationship between how I was on the inside and how the world appeared on the outside. For example, when my heart closes, my world doesn't appear very beautiful. My world becomes a place of boredom and disenchantment. And when my heart is open and when I feel love in myself, then I feel like everything's beautiful and I have motivation and I want to do things, and my creativity is sparked, So there's always this interrelationship that I observed, how can I have these highs and lows, and how come life changes so quickly, and how people respond to me depending on what state of mind I'm in, right? So for me, I was always observing things very closely because I wanted to figure out how all this works. In a way, the outer and the inner are kind of separate dimensions, but in a way, they're also really closely related, right?
Yeah.
The research that I shared in the beginning with Dr. Tiller shows that overlap. And it's almost like a chain, right? We have the physical layer on the outside, the three-dimensional reality that Newton described in his books, and Einstein denoted with his mathematics, right? But the further we go on the subjective, the further the boundaries become fuzzy between inner and outer. And it almost seems that the outer is kind of like a layer of the inner. That the outer is almost like the final layer of the inner. So the inner dimension is almost like an a priori, like implicate order, like David Bohm would say. And the outer is more like an explicate order, like something that's more on the outside that comes subsequent to what's going on the inside. Don't want to get too complicated, but it's like
no, I think it is a difficult topic, and I appreciate you can geek out with us as engineers today. I think there's, of course, we're going to want to go deeper than we have time to go, but the thing that I'll just echo, maybe to bring it back into the more pragmatic with what I do, is I continue to be astounded by how a change in someone's inner world creates such significant impact in their outer world. Yeah. And we're taught or unintentionally learned through culture and experiences that things on the outer world need to change in order for us to experience something different in our inner world. You mentioned, give me a cup of love. Well, if I want to experience more love, I need these things out here to change. And, as a coach, the work I do with engineers is not just strategies for career growth, but a lot of times recognizing how this inner world needs to shift in congruence with what you're saying you want, which begins with this being. And I think you're so spot on that, like, the more you look at this question about hard science and the mind, and this idea of the soft pieces of our heart, our soul, these emotional qualities of our life that are more difficult to measure, the more I look at the two, the more inextricably linked they seem to become. So my question for you next then is, where does the body fit into this? So we talk a lot about the mind and body connection. Yeah. How do you think about its role in what you just described a moment ago?
I see it like a chain. Like I said, there's a higher mind that's really for us to really develop like philosophies and analyze the world and come up with models how to predict things. It's not the lower mind where we kind of complain and criticize and judge, So there's a higher mind, a lower mind. There's a higher heart or a higher emotional domain and a lower emotional domain. So a higher emotional domain would be like love and enthusiasm and compassion, right? Lower would be more like jealousy, anger, greed, and pride and fear and shame and things like that. And then you have a level lower, and not meaning like better or worse, but the body would be even a more denser layer of that chain, right? And the body would be almost like the deepest part of the subconscious mind, if you want to call it that. Right?
Yes. Okay.
So, and that's where most of the stuff gets stored too, that we don't want to have in our mind and in our heart. So it gets pushed down, and some people have then physical complaints or illnesses and things like that, which they call psychosomatic in psychology. So the body is kind of like the outer layer of the inner world, like Gary said. And that's body is in a way kind of neutral, it's not good or bad. It's like money. It's not good or bad. It's kind of like how you are being with it, right? And what you're thinking about it and how you're feeding it and how you're nurturing it. It can be like a storage for everything that we think about and feel. That's how I see it, and that's how I work with people too, is I focus on their sensations in their body, focus on their feelings in their heart, and focus on their thoughts in their mind, right? And then you have a higher domain even, which is spiritual, they call spiritual, which transcends all the parts and pieces and the relationships between parts and pieces, but is a place of union and unification and transcendence, right? So this would be the whole chain of being, like in Tiller physics, for example, that I already described a little bit in the beginning, there he would have a model like that. And in psychology, it's very similar.
I love that. And what you're saying, it triggers some work that I've been going through lately. I'm digging into Dr. Joe Dispenza's work and this idea of the nervous system and the body as a deep part of the subconscious mind has really opened a lot of insight and wisdom around how important that work is in really addressing what's going on in our subconscious and how that then manifests through the body. It's really powerful, the work that his team is doing. All right, so let me get real practical for myself as an engineering leader and kind of taking this world that I could talk about it all day. Could really dig in, but I want to bring it home to some practical things that I see my clients struggle with and that I struggle with personally as an engineer. And the phrase that comes to mind for me is get out of your head. A lot of times what my coach has said to me and what I've said to my clients is like, hey, we need to get out of your head. You're just trying to solve this problem with the left brain only. And we're not going to think our way out of a problem we thought ourselves into. Like, let's get out of our head. Yeah. Can you maybe take that statement, and if you would agree, like, is that something that can happen to us, and what's really going on there? Yeah. And what's the anecdote? Like, where do we go, or how do we begin to shift into a different mode if we're stuck in our heads?
Yeah, right. So my approach to healing and coaching and psychotherapy, I call psychospiritual. And I call it that because it includes both the domains of psychology and spirituality. And the domain of psychology would include the elements of masculine and feminine. And what you just described with you being in your head and you being into analytical would be more denoted as the masculine aspect of life. It's about analysis. It's about isolation. It's isolating things so you can look at them, and it's about separating things and about controlling things and predicting things, which is a great way to ensure survival, right? It's a great way for us men to make sure that we have a target and we hit the target, and for us to get out and get something. That's the real underlying program underneath that. And that has lots of benefits and has lots of limitations as well. What the feminine does, it comes in, and kind of swirls around all this stuff. And it kind of just points out the weaknesses and flaws in that system. It's just like, well, how come you talk this language? I'm talking this language. Like, how come you live on Mars and I live on Venus, right? So I get out of your head, like learn a different language, learn a different way of being, like understand the emotional language, right? So it's like, okay, yeah, I can be in my ivory tower and be really good and like almost like in a spaceship, and then just be really good at looking down on the earth and saying, this is what's going on down there. You know a lot about life, but you don't know what it's like to be in life. So it's like looking at a river and telling you everything about the river, but you don't know what it's like to be in the water. So in my work, when I work with men particularly, because women don't have that issue so much. They usually come and complain about their husbands and say, how come my husband doesn't talk like you do? It's like, well, yeah, it's because I don't know. I mean, this is just my calling, I guess, my purpose in life. But yes, it's about drawing the man in the ivory tower down into the river of life so he can learn how to swim and surrender to an energy current that should not be controlled and predicted, and that has an intelligence of its own, and just learn how to trust that. So I'm painting this picture for you now. So this is what I've been doing in my own work, since I was young, and when I grew up. It's like I had to capitalize on my strengths, being a man and being very smart, but then also complement myself with another way of being that is completely different, and also learn to be there and learn how to build a home on that planet as well. And then dance in between and to have fun with both and to use whenever it's needed. It's almost like shifting gears in a car. You want to just drive your car in one gear all the time. You want to make sure you can shift back and forth depending on what's needed. When you talk to a child, you wouldn't necessarily talk to them like an engineer all the time. They call that love and logic, right? You got to make sure that you're sort of adjusting with empathy to a level of development where the other person is at, right? So it's about flexibility. It's about fluidity that we want to have, right? So get out of our heads. Yeah, sure. I can get out of my head and have fun. Playful, out of control, non-predicted, but I can also get into my head and get really good in my strengths again in that area. So it's not about either or; it's about both and. Yeah.
So you'll appreciate this story, and my wife's gonna really hope that I pay attention while we're talking right now, because I am the guy you just described. So you mentioned this kind of ivory tower of our minds that we go up into, and I think back to my first marriage, which for those who know my story, married and divorced, and that was a really pivotal time for me going through that. But I remember when the marriage started to struggle, the first thing I did was went out and bought 3 or 4 books about marriage. Started going up into my ivory tower of my mind and trying to figure out how to be a better husband, figure out the problem. And the description you just gave of learning a lot or knowing a lot about life, or for me in that situation, I was trying to know about marriage, with this belief that somehow from that place I would be able to make it all work. But all of the real problems were happening in my marriage. And I didn't actually have the courage or the understanding to get out of the tower and get into the marriage
Yeah.
and deal with it. And what maybe marriage is a good domain for us to use as an example, or anything that you think's an easy practical application, Daniel. But
Yeah.
can you, like, what would it look like in real life, in real practice, to come out of the looking down about, mind, masculine energy, and to drop into being in that place? Like, what's actually happening? Ironically, this is me being in my mind right now asking you the question, but it's like, how do I do it?
Yeah, I mean, whenever we use something defensively, it's never a good thing, because some people can use their emotions defensively to maneuver through life. Some people can use their mind defensively and to maneuver through life. It's almost like we use it to hide from something. We use it to avoid something. We use it to not be confronted with something that would be intimidating or challenging for us. And for someone really confident in their ivory tower or in their mind, they're afraid of stepping down the ladder and getting touched by life. It's almost like we're afraid of being touched in an intimate way by life, because at some point life has touched us in a way that wasn't pleasant.
Yeah.
And then we said, all right, that was too painful. I'm going to just stay in my mind because I know I'm safe there, And women, or the feminine, or life, can bring things to us, and sometimes in an uncanny, super intelligent fashion, almost like water going to the cracks. It's just like, who's going to find that little spot where it's like, oh no, not there, please. And I've been like before. I don't want to do this. So yes. So it's like, thank you, life. Thank you, feminine. Thank you, wife. For pointing out to me where I still have room for growth, not in my engineer mind, but in my, almost like in my emotional landscape, but also in my somatosensory landscape, kind of like the bodily sensation landscape. Okay, so it's almost like when we're very much in our higher mind, we need to learn how to be more in our hearts and more in our bodies. So, and that's really how you do it. You're allowing yourself to just relax and release in the present moment, not trying to go upstairs, but to take the elevator down and stay downstairs as much as you can. Some people say that it's kind of like grounding work. I've done a lot of grounding work in my life to just make sure that even though I wasn't feeling safe, and even though I might felt anxiety by being exposed to something that was uncomfortable, I was just calming my nervous system down over and over again, right? Just like, I can do this. It's safe. It's all right. It's just a person over there. It might look like a demon or like a witch, but it's going to turn into my wife again at some point.
Oh my goodness. I mean, I'm really convicted by this, because I absolutely, still to this day, fall victim to that pattern of using the mind for defense, to protect myself from the hard things or the uncomfortable, painful moments. And so I really appreciate you sharing that. Is there any simple practice or behavior or tool that you would give to somebody if they just want to begin to taste this idea of a grounding, or the elevator down, where you might encourage someone to begin?
It depends how strong it is. For me, the most important thing was to make this a real priority in my life, because if I didn't make it into a priority in my life, I would actually still lie to myself and escape in very sneaky ways. Okay. So for me, it was like, okay, this needs to be really important for me, because if I don't get this figured out, I actually don't have a life. I had to make this really important. So for me, there was no dabbling with it. So for me, it's like, how I am doing anything is how I do everything. So if I'm not having a good conversation with my wife or my girlfriend, then it means a lot how I show up in my business or how I work out. It's about being present. So making a real commitment to say, you know what, I'm going to do my best today to just be really present with myself. If I can just be with my breath, okay? Can I just be with my breath? Like, can I just remember to relax and release throughout the day? That's very simple, but not easy to do, because we want hard problems to fix, This is a simple problem, but it's not easy. So yeah, just relaxing and releasing is a super important tool. And you can do it in a myriad of ways, by either sitting down or laying down or going into nature or listening to an audiobook or just getting a massage, and I do it all. Like, this is my life. I mean, this is what I do 24/7. Like, I never not do this. I'm always in this mode, because it's like a lifestyle for me. And I train myself to be that. It's a way of being for me now, to be in surrender and to be in acceptance and to be in a loving state all the time, And if I feel like I'm kind of like getting clogged up with material I don't like, I relax and release and come back to baseline. Basic protocol over and over again. So it's like 5 steps. It's always the same, always the same. And that's what clients pay me $50,000 a year for, is, just for me to kind of remind them, this is the same thing over and over again. You'll end up being in a really beautiful place within yourself if you just keep doing those things.
Yes. We talked the other day about this, and I think it's important to bring it up here. We've covered, there's this left brain, right brain, masculine, feminine. There's the grounding versus the higher level thinking and these. So for me, growing up, it was really hard to understand that these can coexist. And earlier in our chat, you talked about this idea of integration and how it comes together. And can you just talk a little bit about that concept and what you've discovered about these paradoxes or seemingly opposite ways of being and how that fits into our life?
Carl Jung used to say that without the opposites, there's no energy flow. It's almost like there needs to be a plus and a minus for energy to flow in life. So in the initial stages, you're going to feel discomfort by feeling touched in 2 ways at the same time, because it's distracting, right? You just want to focus on one thing, but to have like 2 things at the same time is almost like frying your circuits in a way, overloading your nervous system in a way. So only relaxing and releasing and surrendering and grounding and doing the shadow work is really going to help to create a big enough space inside of yourself so both can be moving through you at the same time. You have to delete some files from your hard drive. You have to clean up the disk, because there's too much stuff on there, it will give you too much noise and too much resistance. So you have to let go and release. Like, you have to empty yourself out so you can have this pure energy flow within you again that will be masculine and feminine. They even call it in Indian philosophy as like the spine, being surrounded with 2 different energies, almost like the caduceus, where there's just the snake-like staff, that's energy flows up with 2 different currents. It's almost like that, Once that energy is established, that union is established, it creates a lot of joy inside of you and a lot of peace energy inside of you. And you will never trade that peace and that love for anything else. Like, it's a wealth and a beauty that cannot be paid in money. It's like, it's an independent happiness, independent of the world. And that's the goal that you get at the end of the hero's journey, because to walk to get there is going to throw everything at you. There will be disappointments, triggers, losses, life not working out the way you want it to, and that's all grist for the mill for this. And that's the only way to reach that place of integration, is to just say yes to life and let life teach you and let life grow you into the man or the woman or the spiritual being that you are to become that. It's a mixture of psychology and spirituality that I just described. It's a spiritual path.
I love the connection to what you said from Carl Jung, the world of psychology, and here from an engineering lens, this idea of without opposing poles, energy doesn't flow. That's linear circuits 101. This idea that without a differential in voltage, the electrons flowing from one pole to the opposite, if it's at the same level, nothing moves, right? There's no electricity there. And it's a perfect metaphor that we can measure and see in the world we live in as engineers all day. Yes. And so it makes perfect sense that that's true in these other domains, just like it's true in engineering and physics.
Absolutely. And in Tiller physics, when we combine the emotional domain and the mind domain, or the masculine and feminine, if you want to just sort of roughly equate those things in that way, then but by having coherence and a synergy between those 2 areas of being, then you create an amazing coherence effect that will then transcend and include the 2 domains, but you create something greater. And that's where psycho-spiritual comes in, right? Because psycho-spiritual is really the unification of the opposites, so it becomes one thing, right? It's about unification. That's the secret sauce in a way, because that's where miracles happen. Miracles are kind of things that's almost like defy logic in a way. It's almost like synchronicity, where the inner and the outer world are moving along so synchronously that it almost feels like it's a dream. And that can happen. And that can happen to anybody who's playing with these kinds of alchemical relationships between in and out and masculine, feminine, and mind and heart and things like that.
Oof. I know, words like miracle trigger a lot of engineers. It's like, okay, that's not real. This is synchronicity. Like, Daniel just went off into the wilderness to sing Kumbaya and all this woo-woo
Absolutely.
stuff. But I just want to echo that Daniel is a scientist at heart. So the work you've done, like, this isn't just I saw something anecdotally once, and I'm drawing all these crazy conclusions from it. Like, there's measurable real outcomes in your physiology, in your psychology, in your inner and outer worlds. And I just think it's so cool. I mean, and today, consider this like a taster. We don't have time to get PhDs in it today, but
Yeah,
I think
absolutely. And it should
that's
always
so cool.
be pragmatic for you and the people who are listening, right? Like try it on and see how it works. Like try it on like an engineer. Like I've tried all these things on. I've tried different psychologies. I've tried different ways of thinking and being and working with my body and my heart. And at the end of the day, I didn't copy anything out there because nothing like one-to-one copying something has really brought any success to me. I just had to make it a fabric of my own being and make sure it works in my life. Like, don't keep anything that doesn't work. And at the end of the day, you can measure how something works by the results you get by living according to those things, right? And it worked for me, and that's why I'm here to share it with other people so they can see what I'm doing and then they can take or leave whatever they feel is useful for them. That's what life's about.
This might be a little bit disjointed, but I feel like it's connected in some ways. And I just am so curious about your perspective because of everything that you've shared and just who you are, Daniel. And this is the Happy Engineer podcast. And happiness is a very controversial topic for a lot of people.
Right.
How is happiness created? What is it? How do you get it? What does it really mean to be more happy? What do I have to do to be happy? Oh, forget about what you're doing at all. Just it's all something inside you. There's a lot of dialogue about happiness. So would you be open to sharing your perspective about happiness, what it is or how to get it, or just what's been your journey in relationship to happiness?
First, I want to say this axiom that I think is true is that two things can be true at the same time. On the one hand, I think it's totally true that happiness can be a 100% baseline in your life and that you can be 100% happy all the time. And at the same time, I think in order to get to a place like that, I think it's also important to embrace the journey and the ups and downs and the peaks and the valleys and smelling the roses or the flowers along the path, because there will be moments where you are not going to be happy, but you have a choice to be content with not being happy, if that makes sense. It's almost like once we make happiness a carrot in front of our nose that we kind of constantly chase, it's almost like an elusive endeavor. We have to let go and wear the world like a loose garment. So not a heavy cloak, but a loose garment. And when you do that, I think happiness will find you rather than you finding happiness. So it's like life will come to you more. Then you don't have to go after life and chase life and make it happen all the time. You'll be met halfway. And happiness is like something that will meet you and find you. Love will find you, but you'll have to make yourself into a recipient of that energy. Okay. So for me, there's been lots of stretches in my life where I was not happy. Those moments I needed to have to learn what it takes to be happy. It was like I had to make sure that I go to different grades first before I can go on to the next grade in school. And life sometimes tells you, how are you being with your not happy heart? How are you being with your not happy thoughts? Can you be loving towards the part inside of you that's not happy right now? And the more often you do it, the more you're going to become love. And when you become love, you're going to be 100% happy. You know what I mean?
The way that this has shown up in my journey, Daniel, and I love what you shared, by the way. It's really powerful. Changing the script around what makes me happy. So for engineers listening to this, maybe it's when I get this promotion, then I'll feel happy. Or when I make more money and can change my lifestyle to this level, then I'll be happier. Or when I get that additional week of vacation and I can go to the Bahamas, then I'll be happy. And we create the carrot in front of our nose that you described. And what I found was if I would break that script of when this, then I can be happy.
Yes.
And allow myself to be happy now, that thing actually comes quite a bit faster every single time. Just to give yourself permission to experience the benefit of the thing you don't have yet now. And then those things start to flow, into our journey even quicker,
Exactly.
which has been really fun.
And the distinction might be helpful here for the people who are listening between what you just described between a conditional happiness versus an unconditional happiness, right? Because the more conditions you have, I can guarantee you the more reason you give yourself to be upset and be unhappy. the less conditions you have, and the more looser you are, and the more like easygoing you are, and the more surrendered you are, and the more playful you are, the more happy you're going to be. You might get what you want, you might not get what you want, but you're still going to be happy on the inside, right? That's the goal, so to make yourself an independent space within yourself, and life will be much more successful as a result of that too. It's killing two birds with one stone. Yeah.
So cool. So cool. Well, Daniel, I think we answered some great questions today, and my guess is probably opened up a lot of new questions for the engineering leaders out there. And I know I have a lot of questions I can't wait to ask you in our future conversations. But where could someone go if they're really curious, and maybe that engineer in them wants to come down from the ivory tower and have a conversation or get to know Daniel and your work, maybe connect to the research you've done, the incredible papers that have been published? Where can someone go to get a little further in knowing who you are?
The best way to contact me is just to go to my website, which is danielharner.com. And you can send me a text, call me, or email me. So the best ways how to get a hold of me. I'm not very present on social media at the moment. So if somebody is curious and like following up on a question or asking more about what I do, then it's the best way to get in touch with me on that website.
Perfect. Well, we'll make sure that's linked up in the show notes. So for listeners, you know where to find that. Click in and we'll make sure to get you all the info on how to spend time with Daniel. And I truly mean this from the bottom of my heart. You will never regret spending time with this man and the incredible work that he does as a coach, as a researcher. Everything that he brings into this life, just to be around Daniel, will change your life. So please do that. Daniel, I believe great engineering, everybody listening wants to be great engineers, great coaching, the work that you do. It's true that questions lead, answers follow. And we spend a lot of our life in pursuit of great answers. I want to have certain things and outcomes and results. So we want to ask great questions. If the engineering leader listening to this wants to reach that unconditional happiness and have some of the shifts and transformations you talked about today, what would be the best question that you would lead them with?
I think the best value, the best bang for your buck in terms of 80-20 principle or whatever, is just always ask yourself, what's the most loving thing to do? Or what would love do in this situation, right? Because most clients want to have something be spoon-fed, it's like, what should I do? And it's like, let's slow down. Let's ask ourselves, what's the most loving thing to do? What would love do in this equation here? And then usually they connect to that part in yourself that's wise and compassionate, and not the short-term thinking, but a long-term and slow thinking process inside of yourself. So I do this myself. If I feel like I have 10 millions of questions and I don't know what to do, I slow down and I say, what's the most loving thing to do right now? And most of the time it comes crystal clear and it's very simple. And it's a wonderful tool.
I have something in my body that I am familiar with, that feeling of emotion. It wells up and it stops right at the top of my throat. It just happened right now. I feel really drawn to that. That is a powerful question.
Yeah, coming from the heart, bringing something, a problem or a person into your heart. And then from that place, it's easier to tackle the problem that you're facing, because then you are coming from an open heart and your mind will work much better. What would love do? Make that your question. It will make life much easier, and it will make your wife much happier, or your husband much happier. So it will be a perfect combination of the mind and the heart. And that is always going to lead to, the result of that is always peace.
So good. And, I coach all engineers, and I'll just say to complement this, it's just as powerful to ask that question at work as it is in your marriage or at home.
Absolutely.
It doesn't matter if you're writing code at Meta on a really important project. I really believe 100% that this applies in every domain. That is so, so good. Well, Daniel, thank you again for your time, your generosity, and your heart, the love that you share with me and with our listeners today. Can't thank you enough for the time, man. Yeah,
thank you for letting me be there with your audience, and I hope this created a lot of value for the people who listen.
No question. Until next time, thanks, man.
Thank you.
Hello, my friend. Zach White here again, and I wanted to let you know that's all we've got for this episode of the Happy Engineer podcast. Thank you so much for investing your time with me today. It is an absolute pleasure to be able to bring you this content. Just as a reminder, it would be amazing if you would subscribe and share this episode with any other engineers you know who may benefit from this. And if you're like me, I hope that you'll take some notes and, more importantly, take action. In our audio version of the podcast on Apple Podcasts and any place that you go to find podcasts, there's a little more content from me about this episode in the debrief. If you really want to hear about how to put this into action, I'd encourage you to go grab that. But thank you for joining us for the video version of our interview today. And again, can't thank you enough for helping us to get the word out about the Happy Engineer podcast and what we're doing. If there's any way we can serve you, would love to do that. Go find us at oasisofcourage.com or reach out to me on social media at Oasis of Courage. And don't forget again to subscribe and click the bell to have notifications of upcoming releases of new episodes of the podcast. As always, I want to leave you with this. If you stay in your comfort zone, you're not going to grow. So let's crush comfort, create courage, and let's do this.